Hi, I'm Mark Thompson, and this is my story. I never imagined I'd be telling a story like this. I always thought life was supposed to follow a straight line. You work hard, you love your family, you keep your head down, and somehow things turn out all right. But after my wife, Sarah, passed away, that line snapped into pieces. Suddenly I was standing in the ruins of the life we'd built, staring at my teenage daughter, Emily, and wondering if I had what it took to hold us both together. Sarah had been my anchor, the one who brought warmth into our little Ohio home. She made sure Emily had fresh-baked cookies for school, cheered at every basketball game, and stayed up late helping with science projects I could barely understand. When cancer took her from us, the silence in the house was unbearable. I tried to fill it, but how does a man who spends his days covered in grease at the factory compare to the love of a mother? Emily was just 15 then, bright, beautiful, full of potential. She used to run track, fast as lightning, and her teachers said she had a shot at scholarships if she kept her grades up. But grief changes people. It eats them alive from the inside, and Emily, she started slipping. At first it was little things, skipping practice, rolling her eyes when I asked about homework. But soon she was staying out late, sneaking out on school nights and coming home smelling like smoke and cheap perfume. I wanted to believe it was just teenage rebellion, but deep down I knew it was more. One night, I waited up for her until nearly 2 a.m. When she stumbled through the door, her eyes glazed and her speech slurred. My heart sank. "Emily," I whispered, "what have you done to yourself?" She laughed, actually laughed, and muttered, "Don't pretend to care, Dad, you're never here anyway." That cut deeper than any knife, 'cause she wasn't wrong. I was working double shifts at the factory just to cover the bills. Some nights I'd pass out in my work boots before even saying goodnight. I thought I was doing what I had to for us, but to Emily, it looked like abandonment. From then on, things spiraled. Teachers called about missing assignments. Coaches stopped asking why she wasn't at practice. And then came the phone call that every parent dreads. The police. "Mr. Thompson, we have your daughter in custody. Shoplifting." I drove down to the station shaking with a mix of anger and fear. When I saw her sitting there smirking like it was no big deal, I wanted to shout, to demand answers. But all I could do was sign the papers, take her hand, and whisper, "You're better than this, Em." She yanked her hand away. "No, Dad, I'm not." From that point, my life became a battlefield. Every day was a fight, against the gangs whispering in her ear, against the dealers feeding her pills, against my own exhaustion. I worked mornings at the factory, evenings at the garage, weekends hauling scrap metal. Just to afford therapy she refused to attend. I'd drive her there, watch her slam the car door, and sit in the waiting room praying she'd actually walk inside. Most times she didn't, but I kept trying. Because what else could I do? I was her father. Quitting wasn't an option. One night, after she'd screamed at me for an hour, calling me useless, pathetic, even blaming me for her mother's death, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at Sarah's photo. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "Am I failing her, Sarah? Am I making it worse?" The next morning I found empty pill bottles under Emily's bed. My hands shook as I flushed them down the toilet. Confronted her, but she just glared. "You don't understand me. You never will." Maybe she was right. But I was determined to learn. The lowest point came on a freezing December night. The phone rang at 3 a.m. A voice I didn't recognize said, "Your daughter's not breathing." We called an ambulance. I don't remember how I got to the hospital. I just remember the sterile smell, the harsh lights, the sound of machines beeping in time with my heartbeat. Emily lay pale and fragile on a hospital bed, tubes in her arms. The doctor's words blurred. Overdose. Lucky she was found. Touch and go? I sat by her side, holding her limp hand, whispering, "Please, Em, don't leave me too. I can't lose you too." Hours passed. Finally, her eyelids fluttered. She looked at me, dazed, and for a split second I saw my little girl again, the one who used to chase fireflies in the backyard. "Dad," she croaked. "I'm here," I choked out. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in years, she didn't pull away. She let me hold her hand. That night was a turning point, but not the miracle ending I hoped for. Addiction doesn't vanish overnight. It clings like tar, dragging you back every chance it gets. Emily wasn't cured. But something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she realized I wasn't the enemy. I was the one still standing when everyone else walked away. And that's where the hardest part of my story really begins. Leaving that hospital with Emily by my side felt like carrying a fragile glass vase across a storm. Every step I took, I was terrified of dropping her, of losing her forever. But I also knew, if I didn't fight harder now, I might not get another chance. When we got home, she barely spoke. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. I tried to fuss over her, make soup, ask if she wanted to rest. She waved me off. But when I stepped out of the room, I caught her watching me. There was something different in her gaze. Not anger, not hate. Maybe confusion. Maybe hope. For weeks after, I changed everything. I cut back shifts, even though it meant the bills piled up. I wanted to be there when she came home from school, when the shadows felt longest. I cleaned out the house, locking every cabinet, checking her backpack, flushing anything suspicious. She fought me tooth and nail. "You don't trust me," she snapped one night. "You're right," I admitted. "But one day, I hope you'll trust yourself again. Until then, I'll keep fighting for you." She rolled her eyes, but her lip trembled. That tiny crack in her armor kept me going. The real war wasn't just in our house. It was in the streets, in the alleys, in the faces of the boys who thought they owned her. One evening, I saw one of them waiting outside the school. Tattoos crawling up his neck, phone in hand, pretending not to see me. My fists clenched. I walked straight up. "Stay away from my daughter," I growled. He smirked. "Relax, old man. She comes to us." I leaned in close, letting him see the exhaustion, the fury, the father in me. "If you ever come near her again, I'll make sure you regret it." For a second, his bravado cracked. He spat on the ground and walked away, but I knew it wasn't over. Those vultures don't let go easy. At home, Emily spiraled between progress and relapse. One week, she'd come home on time, eat dinner at the table, even laugh at one of my terrible dad jokes. The next, she'd slam doors, accuse me of ruining her life, scream that she hated me. Those words cut deep. Every "I hate you" was a knife. But I learned to take the wounds in silence, because behind the rage I saw her fear. Anger meant she was still alive to feel. One night, after a particularly brutal fight, I found myself outside, sitting on the porch steps in the cold. I whispered into the night, "Sarah, I'm trying. God knows I'm trying. Tell me I'm not failing her." The wind rustled the trees. No answer came. But I stood up anyway, wiped my eyes, and went back inside. Because quitting wasn't an option. The second turning point came on an ordinary afternoon. Emily walked into the kitchen carrying a stack of old textbooks. She dropped them on the table with a thud. "What's this?" I asked. She shrugged, almost embarrassed. I want to catch up." "On credits." "Maybe graduate on time." I froze. For months I'd begged her to think about school, her future, and here she was, choosing it herself. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "That's a great idea, Em. Don't make it a big deal," she muttered. But I saw the flicker of pride in her eyes. That night I stayed up late just listening to the sound of her pencil scratching on paper. It was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in years. Of course, recovery is never a straight line. She slipped again. I found her passed out at a party, beer bottles everywhere. I carried her home, laid her in bed, sat by her side until morning. When she woke, she whispered, "Why do you keep doing this? Why don't you just give up?" I took her hand gently. "Because I'm your father. And fathers don't quit." Her eyes filled with tears. For the first time, she didn't pull her hand away. Karma has a way of finding people. The boy who sold her the first pills was arrested in a sting. His mugshot flashed on the evening news. Emily stared at the TV, silent, then whispered, "That could have been me." The older guy who laughed in my face, caught in a gang sweep. 20 years behind bars. I didn't celebrate their downfall, but I felt justice settle in my bones. The people who tried to destroy my daughter were finally facing the weight of their choices. Emily wasn't perfect after that. None of us are. But slowly she started piecing herself back together. She cut ties with old friends, asked me for rides to school, even apologized once. Awkward, stumbling, but real. The night that proved everything, though, was quiet. We were back in the hospital months later. Not for an overdose this time, but a routine checkup. She sat on the bed, fiddling with her sleeve, eyes downcast. Then without a word, she reached out and took my hand. Not the angry grab of a child pulling away. Not the limp hand of someone forced. She held it. "Firm steady, thanks, Dad," she whispered. "For not giving up." I squeezed her hand back, tears stinging my eyes. In that moment I knew the battle wasn't over. But we were fighting it together.